Even prior to the first coronavirus case in South Sudan, many faced starvation. That's the result of 5 years of fighting between forces loyal to rival political leaders. The conflict ended in February with a new transitional government sworn in.
If my children survive, I want them to go to school and to learn to take care of themselves.
Before the coronavirus emergency, aid organizations estimated more than half of the 12 million population would need food aid this year. Nearly 30% are women and children. The war forced a third of the population from their homes. 200,000 of them are now in UN camps around the country. Hundreds of thousands of others are in hard-to-reach areas. For them, food drops are sometimes the only way they'll get food.
Last year, we had to feed 5 million people due to fighting and flooding. Already in 2020, we've had locust invasions, and now there is the COVID-19 pandemic, which we predict could almost double the people in acute hunger by the end of 2020 across the world. The only way we can halt this trend is if generous funding for humanitarian crises like the one here in South Sudan continues.
Floods last year affected nearly 1 million people, forcing the declaration of a state of emergency in some parts of the country. Then a plague of locusts in the eastern part worsened an already dire situation. The UN describes the insect threat as extremely alarming and unprecedented. Farmers who've relied on their crops fear another invasion as eggs hatch from the first wave.
I've tried to chase them away, but they wouldn't leave. They're everywhere. In my backyard, in my mango plantation. The mangoes, the papayas, the guavas that I plant is what provides me with food and income. What will I do if they're being eaten by locusts?
Preventive measures by the government and aid organizations have been imposed to contain the spread of coronavirus. They include restrictions on movement, making many in need even harder to reach. Hiba Morgan, Al Jazeera.
Arif Hussain is Chief Economist and Director of Research, Assessment and Monitoring at the United Nations World Food Programme. Joins us now by Skype from Rome. Good to have you with us. So, as I'm sure you're aware, we constantly hear the headlines about how even developed countries' economies are struggling right now because of the coronavirus. Does the world have the capacity to help others in places of real extreme need right now?
Absolutely. I mean, the unfortunate thing is that before coronavirus came, for the last 4 years, we have seen an increase in hungry people across the world. 4 years ago, we had 80 million people who were suffering from wars and climate shocks and economic instability. Today, that number is 135 million. That's a 70% increase. On top of that, we have got another 130 million people, which we are projecting, are going to become hungry in 2020 because of the COVID. These are the people we were not assisting before. And they are, people who were relying on remittances, who were working, who had jobs, and they no longer have those jobs. And many, many people in the places which you are mentioning, they are, to begin with, hand to mouth. So if you don't work, you don't eat. But bottom line is that this is a global problem which requires a global solution. And until we get to that solution, we need to make sure that collectively we not only save lives, but also save livelihoods.
Right, but I mean, what will then happen to people? Are we going to see people starve to death, basically, in some places?
You know, this is a really, really terrible situation right now. As World Food Programme, last year, we assisted almost 100 million people, of which about a third are people who are living in war zones. If we cannot get to them, they will face the unthinkable at large scales. I mean, think about places like Yemen, Syria, South Sudan, Northeast Nigeria, Burkina Faso. These are places in war zones where people, to begin with, are struggling so badly that if we don't get to them, yes, they will die.
For viewers who are watching this, let's try and present something positive. What can someone do to help?
First and foremost, we have to save lives. WFP is the frontline agency out there working on this. we need to make sure that we sustain our operations. That means, first of all, that we need money, which is equivalent to about $10 to $12 billion in 2020 to make sure that we maintain our operations and assist the additional people we need to. That's number one. Number two, we need to make sure that we pre-position food and cash and other things which people are going to need. Because if we don't do that and supply chains are not working, a lot of people will be in jeopardy. Number three, we need to make sure that we are able to move medical equipment as well as staff, medical staff across the world. And for that, we need about $350 million. So that's the first thing. We need resources. If we have the resources, we can do the job, number one. Number two, we need to make sure that the global commercial supply chains continue to work. Because if they stop, money is not enough. So that is the second thing which is absolutely necessary. The third thing is poorer countries need to be given that fiscal space so they can deploy safety nets, so they can help their people before those people have to sell their assets which they use to earn income. Because trust me, when people are put in a position where they have to sell their assets, which
let me
they
just,
use to earn
if I can just
income,
jump in there, because it sounds to me like on your second point, are you basically saying the world needs to come out of lockdown?
Basically, what I'm saying is that we are in a state where people many people around the world, and particularly in poor countries who are in lockdown, they have to make a choice between either they have to go to work or they starve. And that's a real choice which people have to make.
I mean, what do you want them to do? Are you saying that the lockdown should be lifted in those places?
I don't think it's a matter of lifting lockdowns. It is a matter of making sure that we are protecting the most vulnerable populations from the disease, while also making sure that the economic activity starts in the poor countries,
right,
so they can earn the living, because bottom line is they're looking at starvation. This is why we are talking about 265 million people who are going to need assistance.
Understood. All right. Thank you very much, Asafo-Adjei there from the World Food Programme.
Thank you.